his life. Rabbi Rothchild came into the Beit David Hanan Lake Shul as a rabbi. I don't know, let me see 1 second, Rabbi, I'm gonna unmute you for a second. There we go. Rabbi, you there?
Yeah, it's like a dream to be able to mute a rabbi.
How many years ago was it, Rabbi, that you were the rabbi of the Beit David Hanan Lake Shul?
We made Aliyah 11 years ago in 09.
Seems like yesterday. It's incredible.
Yeah,
absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So when Rabbi came into the shul, I know myself specifically, that was actually when I started partaking and getting more involved in the Beit David Hanan Lake Shul, as I was going through my teshuvah process as well. And Rabbi was very instrumental in regards to making an effort in forcing Torah learning. Tremendous amount of Torah classes he was giving out. I know Mendy and Helga both enjoyed tremendously and gained so much from all the classes, Rabbi, you gave throughout the years. And I'm just so happy right now that you're going to be able to give a class in honor of Mendy. I know Mendy right now is watching from Shemayim right now, and very excited that you're a part of this. And I know you need to also do some sharing. Is that correct? So I'm going to actually give you some.
Yeah.
Let me give you some.
You could hover over my name, just make me a co-host or something.
Yeah, I think you are now a co-host. Let me just make sure. Can you try to share just to make sure?
Yeah, it allows me to share.
Okay, perfect. All right, with that being said, Rabbi, thank you again so much for partaking in this, and looking forward to an amazing class.
Okay, fantastic. Let me just say one thing before I actually start, and that is, I don't know where the other people giving the classes were from, but I'm sitting in Israel, which means that there could be some technical difficulties at some point. I hope not. But if at some point my internet goes down, which does happen occasionally, just stay where you are and I will I'll have to relog back in. It happens occasionally because unfortunately we are in lockdown now in Israel. We have the distinction of being the only country in the world on 2 lockdowns. This is our second one. And that means that half the country is on Netflix, which means that a lot of the bandwidth gets used up. So if I do get knocked off the internet, I will just sit tight and I'll get back in there. So let me just start by saying a word or two about Mendy. I was the rabbi of the Highland Lake Shul for 5 years, for those who don't know me. And one of the committee members who interviewed me for the job was Mendy. And I remember him, this is going back to 2013, I think I took the interview. I started in 2003, I'm sorry. And I started in 2004. And, and Mendy asked some very tough questions at the interview, but they completely indicated what kind of person he was. And I would say I put 3 C's together in my life that I tell my kids about, the most important things to succeed in life, and Mendy had all of them. Number 1 is commitment, that you're completely committed to something, right? Whatever it is, you choose it, you're committed. When Mendy became Baal Tshuva, became religious, he was committed. 2 is confidence, that you have to mamash believe in everything that you believe in confidently, even when people tell you, you're wrong, it's not going to work. Confidence. And the third one, and I put that last year, maybe the most important, is consistency. And Mendy was mamash one of the most consistent people I know. And until, his illness stopped him, he was a regular at the Minyan, never missed. Even when he got sick and it was hard for him to come, he came. And only when it was literally impossible for him to come. And, and in his last days, he was able to blow the shofar, and I wasn't there, but I heard a recording, and it's just like unbelievable that he was able to get out sounds from the shofar. I had visited Mendy just a few weeks before he passed away, and it's hard for me to imagine that he could blow a shofar. He was having trouble breathing. And I mean, mamash, Mendy was such an inspiration to me. when I started teaching Gemara, and, Mendy was there every week, never missed. And when I left and Rabbi Abrams took over, he never missed, continue online with him. And, that's one thing we learned. One of the first things Chazal tell us is that it doesn't matter whether a person does a lot or a little, as long as you have that right spirit and attitude towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu with that level of consistency that Mendy had. He was mamish a hero of mine and an amazing inspiration. And, of course, they say about children that they're raised in a village. Well, it's not only true of children, it's true of adults. Mendy had a village of adults and children around him, and including I see Enrique's on, and I'm sure there are other family members. I can't see everybody, and Michael, the son-in-law, just so much goodness, Torah learning to support Mendy, to be behind him, and he's very, very sorely missed. And just one more thing before I start the shiur is that I remember I think it was my first year in Highland Lakes. Boom, a hurricane hit. Yom Kippur, the shul was closed down. Sukkot closed down. We couldn't even use the shul. There was no power. So the shul moved into Mendy's sukkah. Mendy had a generator, and we davened in Mendy's sukkah. So when I think of sukkahs, that's one thing I think about. The second thing I think about is that Mendy always sent guys every year to build my sukkah. Of course, I'm not the most handy guy in the world, so I really appreciated that. And I know I wasn't the only one that he did that. Many of the rabbis, he sent his workers to build their sukkah for him, for them. And so he had a chelek in every moment that anyone sat or did a mitzvah in our sukkah. He had a chelek, he had a share in that. Really, Sukkot, I have to admit, is, I don't know if I should say this, my favorite holiday. We should love all the holidays. I love Sukkot, and I always associate Mendy with Sukkot. People associate Mendy with Rosh Hashanah because he blew the shofar, but to me, I think of that sukkah of the hurricane. I think of Mendy building our sukkah, so that's some things. And I have to say, I sorely miss Mendy when I come back to visit Highland Lakes, and it's very painful. But knowing, being a person of faith, that Mendy, it's like he's mamish in the olam emes, he's in the true world, and he's able to be nene miziva shchina. Muted there. Okay, there. Someone you muted me by accident, Michael. I said it's a congregant's dream. You imagine when the rabbi gives a drasha that everybody has a mute button. That would be like, right? I think about that with my kids too. Wouldn't be bad. Or if you could just, tune out that nobody can see you. You press turn off video, and no one can see you. As far as I know, all I'm looking at is a bunch of names here. I think Rav Shlomo Katz has his video on. So Rav Shlomo, how are Rav Shlomo's right here, Mamashin, just a few blocks away from us, but worlds apart since we're under lockdown. But okay, so let's get going. I really hope you'll enjoy this. Try to do something a little bit different, and to draw on some of my experience as a tour guide here, and and how it connects to Sukkot. Okay, so there's a well-known book. I think it's well-known. It's called The Artless Jew, and it's basically a scholarly work. And it discusses how in Judaism we are artless, that we don't really have a long history of art. And most religions do have a long tradition of art, although it starts, of course, in the Catholic Church with icons. But if going back even before that, even pagan religions had histories of art. Of course, paganism, avodah zarah, idolatry, they represented images of God through art and things like that. And basically go back to the beginning of time, and you have representatives of art, of the visual arts in every faith except Judaism. That's what the book posits, and why it's called The Artless Jew. And of course, we know why that's true, because of the second of the Aseret Dibra, the second of the Ten Commandments, that forbids us to images and imagery and so on and so forth. And we take that, of course, extremely seriously. The idea of using images of representing God is like unheard of. And so if you look actually in the Koran Siddur, some shuls use art scroll, some the Tilat Hashem, everyone different, but the Koran is very popular here in Israel. And in I think it's the English version of it, and there was a note I saw, maybe it wasn't the Koran, I think it was the Koran, and it's talking about the Shema Yisrael, right? Of course, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Eloheinu Hashem Echad. And in the notes on the bottom, it said something to the effect that Judaism is an auditory religion. We're a religion about listening, not about vision, about seeing, right? Shema Yisrael, we listen, hear the Lord our God, the Lord is one, Hashem is one. How do we experience that? We don't experience that with our eyes. We experience it with our ears, with our souls. We hear it. We absorb God in our nishamot through hearing Shema Yisrael. Right? We're not a vision of sight, right? It doesn't say, see, O Israel, re'eh, but Shema, right? And we are an auditory religion. Now, this thesis that Judaism is artless and that we are an auditory religion, it's very nice and neat, but it's not 100% true. It's not 100% true. Of course, we all know of Jewish art, and it's very easy if you think about like, pictures of in behind me a picture of the Kotel. Well, that's actually a photograph, but we see images and Mark Chagall and all kinds of things. But let's go back a little bit into Bayit Sheni during the Second Temple. Right, during Bayit Sheni, the artistic expression was expressed mostly through coins. And so I'll give you an example here. I'm going to share my screen of an example, if I can find it here. 1 second. Okay, 1 second. This is okay, show all windows. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm just looking for the document that I'm trying to find here. Okay, there it is. Okay, let me open that up. So, like I said, it was expressed through coins, and here is the example I wanted to share with you. Okay, so you can all see my screen. And so here, this is from what's called the Mered HaGadol. The Mered HaGadol, the Great Revolt, of course, begins in the year 66 when we rebelled against the Romans. Now, if any of you were on the shiur I gave for Tisha B'Av for the shul, you would know the whole history and how that started all the way back to the Maccabees, Caesarea. That's a whole nother talk, which I think is really fascinating stuff that most people are not familiar with, but we're not going to get into that today. So take a look at these coins from the Great Revolt. So on the right is like what the actual coin looks like, okay? But on the left is an artistic rendering so you can see it better. So what do you see in the middle here? You see an etrog. That is an etrog in the middle of this coin during the Great Revolt. Now take a look at the bottom, right, which is the flip side of the coin. You see a lulav, right? Two images of the lulav and with the hadassim and the aravot. So between the two sides of the coin, you have the daled minim, right? And so think about that for a second, right? What's going on? We're rebelling against the Romans, and the revolt is actually going very well the first couple of years, and we start to mint our own coins. Now, they must have sat down at some point and said, well, what should we put on that coin? Well, maybe we should put a piece of matzah on the coin. Matzah is about freedom. It's a Chag HaCherut. Pesach is all about freedom. Maybe we should put the Daled Kosot, right? The Daled Lashonei Geulah, the four expressions of freedom. Why in the world would they put a lulav and etrog? right? Why not some symbol related to Pesach? I put the maror, the charoset, I don't know. There's so many symbols for Pesach. Pesach is not short on symbols, yet the artistic symbol that they choose, and this is an expression of their art, is a lulav and etrog, lulav and etrog. Okay, and we have to understand, why did they choose that? We're talking about, this is during the time when the second Beit HaMikdash is standing, Mered HaGadol. Now, something very interesting, parenthetically, I should add here. Let's say the Chazal discuss a case where a band of an invading army comes, lo aleinu, into some town, and they take it over. At what point does that invading army, are they considered occupiers, that they now really control it, and they're not just there temporarily? When do they become really the balabas? They're in charge of the place. Now, what is the practical difference? Because there's a halacha called dina de malchusa dina. Dina malchusa dina means that the law of the land is the law. So the United States government has laws. You have to pay your taxes. You have to obey street signs. You can't, there's all kinds of laws. You don't need me to tell you. So you have to follow those laws, because there's a halacha of dina, the law of the malchut, of the ruling authority, is a law. Even though it may not strictly be Jewish law, as long as it doesn't contradict it, you still have to follow it. So we have to know, when does a country, right, when do they become a malchut? When do they control it? So the Rambam writes, the moment that they mint coins is when they are considered no longer invaders or temporary dwellers, but actually a malchut. So here, you have to understand, when they're minting coins, this is very significant. This is taking on a significance of meaning that we are now the balabayas, no longer the Romans are, but we are now once again in control, which again confounds the question of, why did they choose this symbol? So, but again, bigadol, in general, we're talking here about the idea of Jewish art is expressed here during Bayit Sheni through coins. Of course, it's expressed through the Beit HaMikdash. The beauty of the Beit HaMikdash, the Gemara in Sukkot in the 5th parak says that if you haven't seen the Beit HaMikdash, you've never seen a beautiful building, in your entire life, right? Of course, that's very, very significant. Okay, so, but leaving that aside for a moment, okay, there's the coins. Now here, look at this artwork. Coins from the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Bar Kokhba rebellion was led by Shimon Bar Kosiba, which Rabbi Akiva changed his name to Bar Kokhba, then was changed back to Kosiva. Not going to get into the details of the rebellion, but suffice it to say that it happens in the year 132. Some 60 years after the second Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, and the rebellion goes well at first, but it ends in a very, very bad way. Some 500,000 Jews are killed in the city of Beitar, and a miracle occurs that even though the Romans did not allow the Jews to bury the bodies, they maintained their freshness for a year until they got permission to bury them. And because of that nace, that miracle, Chazal established the last and final bracha of benching, the bracha of Hatov HaMeitiv, the God who's done good and will and continues to do good and will do good, who hativ, who yetiv, and so on. Right, that bracha was established as a result of the miracle after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and it was the result of the Bar Kokhba rebellion that Eretz Yisrael becomes known as Philistia or Palestine, because the Romans wanted to name it after the traditional enemy of the Jews. But look at the coins from the Bar Kokhba rebellion on the left side, right? Makes sense. What are they going to put? The Beis HaMikdash is an image of the Beit HaMikdash, right? But what's on the other side of the coin? Look on the right, the lulav, and next to it is an etrog. Right. This is, folks, this is fascinating. The Great Revolt in 66, they mint coins. They put a lulav and etrog. The Bar Kokhba rebellion, they put a lulav and etrog 60 years later. Okay, and they put the Beit HaMikdash, that I get. The Beit HaMikdash have been destroyed. They want to remember it. They want to rebuild it. Okay, fine. But the lulav and the etrog, what we have to really understand, what does this mean? Why should they have the lulav and etrog? Why did that appear in their artwork? Now, by the way, I know this is kind of a silent class, but if you want to put it into the notes, does anybody know? This is probably not such a hard question. You should be able to figure this out. Does anybody know what is the number one symbol that archaeologists have found in Eretz Yisrael at Jewish sites? In other words, when they uncover a Jewish site, they find some symbol, some artwork, whatever. Anybody know what the number one symbol is? And I'm trying to enlarge my screens. I can see the notes, but I'm having a little issue here. Does anybody know? So okay. Michael, I don't know. Can you unmute everybody for a second? And maybe someone will give us an answer.
Yeah, give me a second here, Rabbi. If anybody actually would know the answer, you could just raise your hand on the bottom. I'll give anybody the option right now. You can go ahead and unmute yourself. 1 second. Anybody wants to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. I'm seeing on the chat here, menorah from Judy Abrams. Menorah, everyone's menorah.
Very good. Outstanding. The number one symbol or artistic rendering that we have in archaeology is the menorah. We find the menorah. Okay. Now, the number two, do you know what the number two image is? The lulav and the etrog, right? It's the most, hello, there's Rabbi Abrams and a few other people from Eretz Yisrael. Wonderful. Robertson Abrams. So the number one symbol in archaeology is the menorah. The number two symbol we have found is the lulav and the etrog. So here's two examples: the Mered Hagadol from the Great Rebellion, the coins, and you have from the Bar Kokhba Rebellion as well, the lulav and the etrog. And so the question is, why the lulav and the etrog? Why do those become such significant symbols? Okay, so anyhow, so you can mute everybody again, Michael. Okay, and that was the extent of our audience participation. So let's go on. So why the lulav and etrog? So I remember actually learning this as a kid. I used to love to read the book. It's called The Book of Our Heritage. It's 3 volumes, Eliyahu Kitov, very easy to read, and it goes by the Jewish calendar. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the book. And I remember reading this. I don't know, I must have been in either elementary school, 7th, 8th grade, first time, and it made an impression on me. And then as I got older, I saw it's a midrash that it quoted, but it's come up many, many times. And the midrash says as follows. It says that one of the symbols of a military victory was the brandishing of the lulav. When you held up your lulav, that was a symbol of victory. And the midrash says that is by way of analogy, why we take the lulav and etrog right after Yom Kippur, because we went into, so to speak, battle. We went into a trial. And who was victorious? The one who comes out of the trial holding the lulav is victorious. And so therefore, says to me, the lulav was a symbol of this type of, it was a symbol of victory. Now, okay, so that's interesting. Maybe that's one idea why the lulav and etrog became the symbol for the Mered Hagadol, the Great Revolt in 66, and it made its way onto the coins of the Bar Kokhba Rebellion as well. Interesting, the book of Maccabees, which did not make it into the canon of the Tanakh, which tells the story of the Hanukkah story, the book of Maccabees says that the Maccabees, Yehuda Maccabees, when they came and they redeemed the Beit HaMikdash and rededicated it, guess what it says? When they entered the Beit HaMikdash, it says they entered with a lulav. They entered holding a lulav. I don't remember if it says the etrog as well, but certainly with a lulav, right, as a symbol of their victory. right? They enter with the symbol of their victory. Of course, you know, the time of year, Kafeh Kislev, is not, it's not the time of Sukkot. So it wasn't like, oh, they had a leftover, you know, one of those plastic bags with their lulav in it, you know, and their wife is yelling at them to get rid of it. So they said, oh, let's take it to the Beit HaMikdash, right? Which is, by the way, not that that ever happens to me. Actually, it happens every year, but you know, and you have this sitting around. It's not what it's already Kislev. They don't have it anymore. But the Maccabees, they come into the Beit HaMikdash victory with the lulav and etrog. I mean, pretty amazing. Now, I want to look at back to the sheet. This is a very fascinating article I found a couple of years ago. The truth is, I gave this shiur a couple of years ago as well. And this is an article from it's a Bar Ilan journal on Jewish art. I don't know if you're familiar with the organization. Is a guy here, Rabbi Jeffrey Sachs Atid, where they actually did a lot of work on Judaism and art. But anyhow, this article by Rivka Ben Sasson, I don't know who she is. Maybe she's a professor at Bar Ilan, but it's in the Bar Ilan journal. Talks about botanics and iconography, and basically her article is about the image of the lulav and the etrog in art and how it appears and why. So here's just 4 short lines from her. So she says, this juxtaposition, now, by the way, Jews love that word, juxtaposition. I don't think I've ever heard a non-Jew use the word juxtaposition. But anyhow, this juxtaposition of the 4 species with the facade of the temple, right, which is what you see right above you, together with the inscription for the freedom of Jerusalem, is what it says on the coin, transforms them into a representation of the temple and the land of Israel, as well as a symbol of the redemption of the people of Israel. So here's what she posits based on her study of the lulav and etrog, that it represents, right, because its proximity to the temple on the other side of the coin, to the Beit HaMikdash, right, it represents the land of Israel and a symbol of redemption. Okay, and so it makes sense, right? And right, we have to see if that's true or not in our literature, but what her theory makes sense, right? Because Bar Kokhba, there's no Beit HaMikdash. They want to build the Beit HaMikdash. One side of the coin is the yearning for the Beit HaMikdash, and the other side, right, is the redemption of the people of Israel, the redemption, right? The redemption. It makes sense. Okay, so let's see a few more sources and see if that's true. Does the lulav and etrog really represent the land of Israel? Of course, we all know that the lulav and etrog, all different mamarei chazal, all different statements by the sages. It represents the 4 types of Jews, right? And the arava is the Corona Jew because it has no taste and no smell. But I think that's really funny, but I can't take credit for that. I read it somewhere. But anyhow, so you have the 4 types of Jews. It represents four different body parts, all different kinds of stuff. But does the lulav and etrog, does it really represent Eretz Yisrael? If someone said, okay, fine, the pomegranate, the rimon, or dates or the fig, the 7 species, fine. But does the lulav and etrog really represent the land of Israel? So I'm gonna have to stop this share and switch to another source sheet here. All righty, folks. Let's see where that is. Okay, give me 1 second here. Pulling it up. Okay, and I think I accidentally just X'd it out. Give me 1 second. That makes sense. Why it's not opening is because I had X'd it out by accident. Just give me a second here. Okay, there we go. Okay, now, so we have to see, does this hold up in our literature? Here, let's admit. Oh, my father-in-law, Danny Wildman, is now joining. Okay, let me share this with you, these notes. Okay, so Let's take a look at the source. The first source we're going to look at, of course, is the pasuk. All right, in Vayikra Chav Gimel is, it's the last of the Shalosh Regalim Sukkos. It's the last of the festivals, right? And here, the Sukkah, we're told in pasuk Mem Gimel 43, Laman Yedu Doratechem, so the generations will know that we lived in the Sukkah. But the lulav and etrog appears really in verse Mem, but it doesn't really tell us anything about, doesn't give us the reason for it like it does for the Sukkah, just tells us the species. And even that is clouded in mystery. There's a machloket, a dispute in the Talmud as to what each species is. But okay, so the Rashbam, who's what's called a Pashtani, always wants to get to the simplest reading of the text, and he explains, what does this mean, Laman Yedu Doratechem, that in order that future generations will know. So look what he writes. He explains, and for the sake of time, we'll just read the English, but you have the Hebrew there, and if anybody would like me to email this to them after, you can send me an email at rabbi.rothchild@gmail, or ask Michael and he'll put you in touch with me. And yeah, so he says, what is the plain meaning of the text is in agreement with the view expressed in Sukkah, according to which the word Sukkah to be understood literally. The meaning of the verse would be, construct yourself your festival for yourselves, the festival of the huts, when you gather in your grain and grape harvest. So in other words, when it says we're celebrating Sukkot, it's talking about actual Sukkot, not the Ananea Kavod, not the clouds of glory, but the simple reading is the pasuk is talking about a real sukkah. So he says, you are to do this at the time you gather in the produce of the earth, and your houses are filled with all the good things, and the earth produces such grain, grape, wine, and oil. This is to be done. Now listen, in order that you will remember, right, in the desert, right? Keep Sukkot Shavti et Bnei Israel, in the desert for a period of 40 years, when they neither owned land nor found themselves in a cultivated part of the earth. Remembering all this, you will have ample reason to be grateful to the one who has provided you with all of your present wealth and comfort. You must not fall into the trap of thinking that all the success is due to your own efforts. In other words, let's live a life of contrast. In the desert, we did not own land. It was uncultivated. Here we are in Eretz Yisrael on Sukkot. And let's remember that God gave us this incredible land and wealth and comfort, right? And that's echoing the psukim in Devarim, right? That says that you will come to the land of Israel, you will build homes, and you will forget God, and don't do that, and so on and so forth. So he's echoing that. He says that's what Sukkot is. Sukkot is the contrast. Remember, you came from nothing, you had no land, nothing, and now God gives you a land. Wonderful. That's beautiful. But that's the Sukkah. Can we apply that as well to the lulav and the etrog? So here's the Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam. The Rambam originally wrote the Moreh Nevuchim in Arabic. So the Hebrew here is a translation, and so is the English. So let's just look straight at the English again. So he says as follows: I believe that the four species are a symbolical expression of our rejoicing that the Israelites changed the wilderness, right? As the pasuk says, it was not a place of seeds or figs, vines, pomegranates, water to drink. That was the midbar. That was the desert. With a country, they changed it with a country full of fruit trees and rivers. In order to remember this, we take the fruit, which is the most pleasant of the fruit of the land, branches which smell best, most beautiful leaves, and also the best of herbs, the willows of the brook. These four kinds have also three purposes. First, they were plentiful in those days in Palestine so that everyone could easily get them, right? Practical. Secondly, they have good appearance. They're green, some of them. The citron and the myrtle are also excellent as regards to their smell. The branches of the palm tree and the willow have neither good nor bad smell. Thirdly, they keep fresh and green for 7 days, which is not the case with peaches, pomegranate, asparagus, nuts, and the like. So the Rambam, following in, but saying it far more explicitly, but following in line with the Rashbam, says that it's not just the sukkah, but it is the four species, the daled minim, the lulav and etrog, that represent this notion that God gave us this incredible beautiful, miraculous, amazing land, right? And so that's what the lulav and the etrog represents, according to the Rashbam, explained by the Rambam. That's what the lulav and etrog is about, Eretz Yisrael. Okay, it's about gratitude for Eretz Yisrael. Now, let's take a look here at the Abarbanel. Remember, he left Spain in 1492 with the exiles, right? Don Yitzhak Abarbanel. Let's again go to the English. So he says something really fascinating as well that I had not heard till I saw this from this Abarbanel, right? We have three, right? The Shalosh Regalim, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, the three festivals, Passover, Sukkot, Shavuot, and Sukkot. He explains why three. Hashem commanded Yisrael to celebrate three festivals. Why? To give thanks for three good things that he did for them: the exodus from Egypt, the giving of the Torah, and the inheritance of the land of Israel. So Pesach, fine, we're gratitude. Thank you, Hashem, for getting us out of Egypt. Shavuot, gratitude for giving us the Torah. But what is Sukkot? Thank you, Hashem, for giving us a land, for Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so we see this really borne out very beautifully in the sources, and we'll see a little bit later how the Merit Agadol and so on, how they really drew on this. But this next one, if I can say so, it's one of my favorites. I really like this. It's very beautiful. And if you read it quickly, you don't necessarily appreciate the beauty, but anyone who's learned any kind of Gemara can appreciate this. Right? This is actually a Yerushalmi, right? The Talmud Yerushalmi, right? We have the Talmud Bavli written in Bavel, the Talmud Yerushalmi, Bavel is Babylon, of course. Yerushalmi was written probably in Tiberia and Tiberias, although part of it was probably also written in Caesarea and Caesarea. But to give kavod to Yerushalayim, it's called the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. And it says as follows: Kol Shiva Yamim, all 7 days, Osa Adam et Sukkatot Keva, right? You make your sukkah your permanent dwelling place. It Beito Arai, and your house becomes your temporary place, right? How do we know that that's true? Right? So it quotes the pasuk. Look at the second line. Basukot teshvu. You have to sit in the sukkah. Let's stop there for a second. Teshvu. The pasuk says you should sit. Teshvu, lashevet. What does lashevet mean? So if you know any Hebrew, lashevet can mean like what I'm doing now. I'm sitting in a chair. So maybe it means you should sit in a chair. You have to go in the sukkah and sit there. Right? Maybe it literally means you have to sit there. But it can mean something else. Let's go on. So the Gemara continues, Ein teshvu ela taduru. Teshvu, it must mean that you have to live in the sukkah, to dwell in the sukkah. Well, how does the Gemara know that? How does the Gemara know teshvu means to dwell and not just simply get a chair and sit there and, have a little snack and, and you can go somewhere else, but the mitzvah would be literally taking a chair and sitting there, zeh, and that's it. So now listen, this is the beautiful part of the Gemara, guys. Listen carefully. Kemad at amrei dvar, like the pasuk says in Dvarim, is virashtem ota v'yishavtem ba. What does the pasuk say? You shall inherit the land, v'yishavtem ba, and you shall dwell, you shall live in the land. So what is the source that the word teshvu in the pasuk, Basukot, you shall sit, dwell in that it means to dwell, to live in the sukkah? Because they compare the word teshvu to vishavtem ba, that you have to live in the land of Israel. So sukkah, we see this beautiful connection between sukkahs and living in the land of Israel. It's as if when you're sitting in the sukkah, it's ki'ilu, you're living in the land of Israel. Right? This is mamish beauty. You can miss that point if you just read the Gemara quickly and say, okay, that's the source, vishavtim, to dwell. But when you start to think about that, I think what the Gemara is really trying to teach us is this really powerful point. Okay, So again, the challenge of Zoom, and there's plenty of people out there listening have taught on Zoom, is that you mamish feel like you're talking to yourself. Like if you feel like you're talking to yourself. But I hope you guys are really appreciating that limud. Reminds me of what actually I heard a story of Rabbi Salanter, who traveled the world giving Musar, trying to teach the world how to be better, more moral, more ethical, good people. He spent his whole life, and someone once said to him, they said, look, Rabbi Yisrael, what if you found that your whole life, you didn't really affect anyone? And so Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, look, if I spend my entire life teaching people and I only affected one person after all these years of teaching, and that one person that I affected was me, he says it all would have been worth it. So that's why I feel like with Zoom, it's if I'm only talking to myself, dayenu. But in any event, it's beautiful, mamish, a beautiful limud. Another interesting from the Yerushalmi, we have a mitzvah in Sukkah in the Beit HaMikdash, and we mimic that in our shuls, but in the Beit HaMikdash, they would encircle the Mizbeach, right, with the lulav and the etrog, and then the arava on the last day, and they would have the Hoshana Rabbah and walking around with these giant aravot, right? They walked around the Mizbeach, the altar, 7 times, and we do that every day of Sukkot, one time around, right? And the last day, we walk around 7 times around a Torah. So why do we walk around? We don't take our matzah on Pesach and walk in circles, right? In Shavuos, we don't do that. So the Gemara in Yerushalmi says, Amar Rabbi Acha, Zecher liYericho. It is a remembrance of the entry to the land of Israel when the Jewish people encircled Yericho 7 times before conquering. Guys, look at this. Mamish amazing. These 2 Gemaras, the 2 Yerushalmis, pointing to this deep connection between Sukkot and Eretz Yisrael. Right here, the entry to Eretz Yisrael, and the previous one about living with permanence in the land. Really, just really very, very beautiful. And there are other sources, but for the sake of time, I didn't include them, but there are others. Now, this concept, though, which of course, when I showed you on the coins, was part of the Mered Hagadol, the Great Revolt, right? Their coins had a lulav and etrog. Why did it have a lulav and etrog? After everything we've just learned, the Rashbam, the Rambam, the Yerushalmi, right? The Yerushalmi, I mean, remember, we're talking about, written a few hundred years after Bar Kochva. You're talking about a long history of the lulav and etrog representing the idea of the redemption, of returning to Eretz Yisrael, about the land of Israel. And I showed it to you through the sources. Now look, it's not only then, we can bring it even further into the 1800s. Now, the Vilna Gaon, Gaon Vilna, who lived in the 18th century, and known perhaps as the greatest genius of all time, actually, I believe he's in the Guinness Book of World Records for knowing the most books by heart. I think he knew over 3,000 books by heart. He wrote a math book. The story is, I don't know if it's true, they said he wrote it while he was in the bathroom, because you're not allowed to learn Torah, and so he needed to do something productive, and he wrote a math book while he was in the bathroom. As my Rabbi Wein, used to say, he says, I don't know if it's true. He says, but one thing I do know is that they're not saying it about me and you. So the Vilna Gaon, wrote this math book. In fact, there's a theorem in the book called Kramer's theorem, which is still studied and implemented and used in geometry and higher math at universities. Okay, great genius. So this book, Doresh Letzion, right? So the Vilna Gaon wanted to make Aliyah. He tried very hard. In fact, he went to the port all ready to go, and he came home. And we don't know why, and there are different theories. Some say he had a nevuah, sort of. He had like a vision that he wasn't supposed to be going. We don't know exactly why he doesn't end up going, but he desperately wanted to go, and he wrote a letter to his family, a goodbye letter. But in any event, so his students end up going, and they become what's called the Yishuv Hayashan, the old Yishuv. When they come to Eretz Yisrael, they go to Tzfat. Why? Because Ashkenazim are not allowed in Yerushalayim. When they had built the Chorva synagogue in Yerushalayim, the money was built by the Sfaradim, by Ashkenazim, who borrowed money from the local Arab population, and they didn't return the money after 20 years. They couldn't repay it. So the Arabs destroyed the synagogue, the Chorva synagogue in the old city of Jerusalem, and they forbade Ashkenazim from coming to Jerusalem. Only Sephardim were allowed in Jerusalem, in the old city. And so the Talmidei Agra, the students of the Vilna Gaon, had to go to Tzfat. They had to stay in Tzfat. Some of them hid in Yerushalayim in a cave. The Marat Tzidkiyahu, if you know where that is, near the Damascus Gate, there's this cave that had been part of a quarry where the stones were taken for the Beit HaMikdash. It's now a cave. So some of the students hid there, but basically they didn't come to Yerushalayim. It wasn't until later, till about 1870. So they're in Tzfat. Now here, this book, the Dorei Tzion, are different insights and people who saw the Vilna Gaon. So listen to this, beautiful, amazing. It says, we're looking at this source right here. Okay, I hope you can all see it here. Right here. Okay, I can draw my little arrow. Okay, it says as follows: Shloshet psukim shagra hayachozer aleim b'chol yom. There were 3 psukim that the Vilna Gaon used to every day. He'd repeat them, like a mantra, right? Al pi talmidav, according to the students. Here we go. Hagra hayachozer al psukim eila b'chol yom. These are 3 verses he would every day. He'd review. He'd recite. First one. Vahi b'shalem sukkah u'monato b'tzion. When God's sukkah was in Yerushalayim and his dwelling was in Zion, right? So again, the pasuk says, "He b'shalem sukkah." In Yerushalayim was Hashem's sukkah, u'monato b'tzion, and his dwelling in Zion. And listen to what the Vilna Gaon says, "V'hosif al zeh," and he added to the pasuk. He explained what it means. He says, "Sukkah mitzvah tase v'lo mina asoy af tzion kach." What does that mean? There's a mitzvah of sukkah that we have. There's a halacha called tase v'lo mina asoy. What does that mean? Let's say I have a sukkah that the schach has been sitting there for 6 months, sitting on top of it. Okay, so I didn't build that sukkah. It's there sort of by accident, retroactively. So the halacha of sukkah, it's ta'aseh. You have to actually take action. You have to do something. It can't just suddenly be there, right? You have to do something. You have to be active. So you said, what does that mean when the pasuk says that God's dwelling in Yerushalayim is in the sukkah? It means that we can't be passive, that when it comes to Yerushalayim, we have to be active. Okay, so continuing the second one, Chazei Tzion Kiryat Moadenu Einecha Tir'ena Yerushalayim Nevei Sha'anan. Right, let us prophesy about it's Zion, the city of the festivals. Our eyes will witness, will behold Yerushalayim, right, the beautiful, peaceful dwelling place. So he explained Moadenu Hainu Moed Hagula. This Moed is the Moed of redemption. Okay. But let's get to the third one. Tzion hidoresh einla, the pasuk in Yirmiyahu is the third pasuk he would quote every day. This Zion means Yerushalayim, Tzion. It had those who would seek it out, but doresh einla. But now there is none. There's no one to seek out Tzion. This is Yirmiyahu talking. The prophet Yirmiyahu is called the prophet of doom because most of his prophecies were very sad. So says the Vilna Gaon, Michlal debai drisha. It means that we have to seek it out. Hainu Tzion hi doreshet et adrisha. Tzion, Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. It is looking for those to seek it out. So these are the 3 psukim that the Vilna Gaon would say every day. Number one is that Yerushalayim, it's like a sukkah that we have to be actively engaged. Number 2, that the Moedim is it's about Geula, redemption. And number 3 is that Yerushalayim is looking for those to look for it, that we have to look for it. Okay, it gets better, folks. Okay, let's Go down a little more. My arrow is still there. So here, this is a letter sent in 1850. They were trying to raise money to rebuild the Chorva to build the Chorva synagogue, Ashkenaz synagogue. Right, and look what they write. It's the students of the Vilna Gaon again. You know, anybody involved in fundraising. I see Elon Sredny's there. I hope he's has his Elon was shul president. You know what it means to send out fundraising letters. So here's a fundraising letter for a shul from 1850, the giant Chorva synagogue, right? So listen to what they say. Mira Keila Amar Letzion me'az galut haaretz v'tava ba'aretz shara livnot beit zul mikdash ma'ad. Okay, let's actually skip down to the part. Okay, second line from the bottom, Kilulei Hashem. He says, Kilulei Hashem chafetz banu lo heranu et kol eila. If Hashem didn't want us, meaning we were rejected, Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, we're in exile from the year 70, now it's 1850, if Hashem didn't want us, right? Lahavienu el hamnucha v'el nachala, right? Simana miltahi atchalta de geula. Say the students of the Vilna Gaon in their fundraising letter. You got to help us rebuild Yerushalayim. Why? Because if Hashem didn't want us to do this, He wouldn't have brought us here. But He must have brought us here to the menucha, for rest, to inherit the land. And it's a sure sign. It's a clear sign that this is the beginning of redemption. Talk about a fundraising letter, right? Send it out to give to our shul because we are the beginning of the redemption. I mean, that's a pretty solid pitch, I would say, as far as shuls go. Seriously, that was their pitch. Their pitch was, it's the beginning of redemption. Now I want to look at this. This one's the clincher here. This is, again, from the Vilna Gaon. It's from a book called Kol HaTorah, the voice of the turtle dove, which is a reference to a pasuk in Shir HaShirim. Look what he says. He says, Acharat Tchunon Shel Mashiach ben Yosef Hatzlocha. One of the qualities of the Mashiach ben Yosef is success. Right? Mashiach ben Yosef precedes Mashiach ben David. Al Yidei Asiyah. His success is because he's a doer. Everything that Yosef did, boom, success. Yosef was a doer. So Mashiach ben Yosef, one of the signs, right, the qualities is doing. It says, V'noda lemizgav davar Rabbeinu, right, and everyone knows well the words of Rabbeinu. Rabbeinu is the Vilna Gaon. He says, "Shtei hamitzvot." Listen to this, guys. If you don't know this, it's kedai. It's worthwhile knowing, and you can repeat this. When someone says, "Hey, anybody have a Dvar Torah on Sukkot?" Here's one little thing you can remember, and maybe you already heard it though. Shtei hamitzvot she'adam nichnas behen shalem b'chol gufo. There are only two mitzvot, says the Vilna Gaon, that a person does them with his entire body. Hein, Sukkah, the Eretz Yisrael, right? The only two is the mitzvah of Sukkah and the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. It's the only mitzvah you do with your entire goof, your entire body. The Remez Natan Lazeh Pasuk, he said, and there's a hint to this in the Pasuk. Says Vayihi. This is one of the three psukim that the Vilna Gaon would review every day. Vayihi b'shalem Sukkot, in Yerushalayim was Hashem's sukkah, u'me'onato b'tzion, and his dwelling in Tzion, right? Because the pasuk talks about sukkah and dwelling in Tzion, in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim. So there, the pasuk is alluding to this idea that there are only two mitzvot that you do with your entire body. So there is what they call cash Torah. Cash Torah. Someone asks you a question, you got it. You don't have time to look it up. There you go. You want to tell someone a nice story. What are the only two mitzvot that you do with your entire body? Sitting in the sukkah and Yishuv and settling the land of Israel. And okay, short little idea. The Hosif and the Vilna Gaon added to this idea. Sukkah mitzvata taseh v'lo min asoi. We said this before. Sukkah, the mitzvah is you have to be active. It can't happen passively. Af Tzion, similarly, Tzion, Zion, Kach, is the same way. Kamor b'midrash ala pasuk. Listen to this one, and you'll never say this the same if you remember this. This is at the end of davening. We say Uva l'Tzion Goel. A redeemer will come to Zion. Right. So listen to the Vilna Gaon how he explains that. Kol zman she'Tzion eina binuyah. As long as Yerushalayim, as long as Eretz Yisrael is not built up, Adayin Hagoel lo ba. The Redeemer will not come. As Chazal said in Megillah Yud Zayin, Mikivan Yerushalayim nivneit, what Yerushalayim is built, Ben David ba. The Mashiach will come. Uve midrash ein bedid ba'at Yerushalayim nivnei. So when we say uva l'tzion goel, it's really read uva hagoel. The Redeemer will come l'tzion. Because when Zion is built up, that is when the Redeemer will come. It's not uva l'tzion that he will come to Zion and redeem it, but it's that he will come to a built up Zion, and that's how the Mashiach will come. All of this that we've just looked at in the last few minutes here, and I'm finishing up right now, is all from the Vilna Gaon. And this symbolism of the Sukkah, again, the Vilna, all these Sukkah are about the Sukkah, about Sukkot, goes all the way back to what we started with. Just to review, we spoke about art, the oldest forms of art. We spoke about the coins. We see the most used symbol in archaeology that we've discovered was the menorah, and the second was the lulav and the etrog, and it appears on the coins of the Great Revolt. It appears on the coins that were minted during the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And it throughout the sources, it seems to be that the lulav and etrog represents the land of Israel. It represents the idea of redemption, coming back to the land, the beauty of the land, as we saw in the Moreh Nevuchim and the Rambam and the Rashbam, and therefore it becomes a symbol of the rebellion, because they wanted to return to the land. And I see it's 8:56. Just getting, I know for those who came in a few minutes late, at the beginning I gave an intro a little bit about Mendy, but one thing just to end again, that all our words of Torah should be Leiloi Nishmato, that should uplift the soul in the Shamayim, and should be a Melitz Yosher for his whole family, and Bezrat Hashem, all his learning should give strength to the family. And I know I guided Mendy in Eretz Yisrael when he came with Helga, and we spent time together, and you just, mamish, saw the love of Eretz Yisrael on Mendy's face. So how appropriate the words of the Shir, the connection between the Lulav, the Etrog, the redemption, Eretz Yisrael, and I have very, very wonderful memories of walking the streets of Yerushalayim with Mendy and of course with Helga. So good night, folks. Hope you enjoyed the shir, and I think who's next? Rabbi Abrams is next, I believe. So
thank you very, very much, Rabbi.
My pleasure. And